The problem for anybody investing in the nuclear is there seems to be a sort of big time and a big delay. So from my perspective, as an insurer, it's just trying to understand, as an insurance broker now, is trying to understand what sits behind that, and then trying to identify the extra different risks that nuclear will bring. So I ask myself, so why is nuclear power different to anything else, and why does it end up with these terrible problems of overspend and over time? And I think it's obviously the scale of the plant is enormous. It takes an awful long time to build them. They cost an awful lot of money relative to other power generation types. And as you all probably know very well, so much of the cost is front-loaded. So that is a huge challenge for everybody who's financing them, everybody who's selling them, everybody who's buying them. And obviously for us, it's a bit of a challenge for the insurance, but probably not as much as it is as you might think. Why is the scale and why is the duration so long? Personally, having worked in the industry as an insurer and an insurance market representative, my view is that there's so much overkill in nuclear. We're writing we're looking at the risk of having nuclear power stations having significant problems, and in general terms they don't. They're very, very well regulated. They're not over-regulated, they're almost always over-designed, and this generates an enormous cost lump sum at the beginning, and of course also makes the project take so long. The other sort of key, if you like, insurance moment is the interface between the end of a construction project and the beginning of a nuclear operating site. And that's just, again, for anybody who's either financing them or working on the plant, whether you're looking at the O&M down the line, whether you're a constructor, then that is a moment of, if you like, slightly more attention, and one that differentiates nuclear power stations from conventional projects. And the reason for that is because the nuclear liability regime is more onerous for operators than for conventional power stations. And that again generates some different issues for nuclear operators. But again, from an insurance perspective, they're certainly not insurmountable. From the insurance markets side, the insurers have been covering nuclear risks for nuclear power sites since the mid-1950s, both on a construction basis and on an operation basis. So there is, on the face of it, no real difficulty for the market to cover the nuclear power project. The dilemma here, perhaps for South Africa, is how is, and the question asked is how is South Africa going to fund these projects? Again, from the insurance market's perspective, it sort of doesn't really matter, because ultimately our job will be to assist all the stakeholders in the project. We work in partnership with all of them to try and identify the risks that each has, and then try and deal with those risks, or at least facilitate and help remove some of those risks for the operator, or for the lender, or for whoever it may be, the constructor or perhaps actually the contractor. So there are insurance solutions across the board that are available that can maybe make the financing easier, that can temper the risk profile of the station somewhat. But there are certain things that fall outside of insurance. And if you again look at some of the problems that have been seen in Europe, where Olkiluoto in Finland is now about 10 years behind, and Flamanville in France is also several years behind. Some of the delays and all of that are not insurable, but perhaps some are. So realistically, for the operator, and actually probably for the lenders, the key thing is to protect the revenue and to make sure that the revenue for the project, if it's delayed or if there's some kind of accidental event, that is protected for the duration of the loss. And that again is very much where the insurance market can assist and help with certain aspects of defraying those risks. Again, on the site analysis for one of the things that we do to quite a large extent and have done for many years is we've supported the industry in trying to mitigate risk through design. So in close involvement of the insurance markets, technical experts from an early stage can often help mitigate some of the risks that we might see, might have watching best practice, or certainly speaking from experience in other parts of the world, that we can bring to a program here that again might ease some of the financing problems and certainly protect some of the contractual positions that will be built up over time as the project progressed. That neatly brings me on to one point that I think is critical, and where I feel, again, we can perhaps work with the other stakeholders in partnership, is understanding the contractual responsibilities of each of the parties, understanding what risks fall to whom, what risks fall outside of the scope of certain responsibilities, and try and work with those stakeholders to understand, analyse, and perhaps transfer, or at least manage some of the risks. So our involvement is, I think, the PBMR or some other small modular reactor perhaps is a better bet. It certainly removes a lot of the complications of big nuclear projects of 1,000 megawatts plus. These would be more manoeuvrable. They'd be able to be installed in multiple sites. They'd be plug and play, almost certainly. They're probably a lot less complicated from a regulatory and operations standpoint. And maybe they represent a future that would actually make all aspects of the program much easier, certainly from a lending and selling point of view, and also from an operational point of view, because they would be perhaps much better suited to the African situation. So again, the insurance market can help with certain aspects of defraying risk on those, but that might be a better option for Africa to pursue than a giant single 2,000 megawatt site.
It wasn't over-designed, and whether there wasn't too much safety built in, which had made these things much more expensive than they needed to be. But my panel assured me that no, all safety requirements were required and necessary. Do you agree with that?
I'm sure if that's what the technical people say, they're right, but I think a lot of what people's understanding of nuclear is driven by an inherent fear of man-made radiation, which is just poorly understood. And I find it bizarre, for example, I think this is true, that for example, around Fukushima, they are busily scraping away soil and rectifying ground that has radiation levels well below what is naturally occurring in other parts of Japan. And it just strikes me that we haven't really got our understanding of the risk that nuclear presents right as a society. And we need to include that, because if we all think it's horrible and dangerous and it's all weapons and nasty things, and people being bubbling away the cauldrons at the back and doing something horrible, then everybody thinks it's a bad thing, and the regulatory system is designed to cope with some of that perception at least. If we have a better understanding of the risk, the real risk it presents to society, I think that might temper at least some of the overkill in the design, which would both reduce cost and perhaps not ease the regulatory burden, but perhaps build the perspective of the regulator.
Without electricity, you don't have growth. We're not planning in the IRP for sufficient growth in electricity to give the economic future of this country a real opportunity. As I always say, electricity is a necessary condition for economic growth, but is not a sufficient condition. What I want to make is that it's all about life. There are long life decisions being made for the nuclear build program, or for any power system. You've got to look 40, 50, 60 years into the future. I know technology will change, but you have to be looking with a long period in time. And I'll just say that time horizons are important. Wind and solar have a lifetime of about 20 years, coal 30, 40 years, and we've come to a nuclear, which is 60 years, or thereabouts. And that means that you've got to build at least three plants in wind and solar to deliver the same electricity over an entire life cycle. That's the one thing. And the other point that should be made in just taking now the IRP, to deliver 62,000 megawatts real terms, you need, the idea is to build 38,000 megawatts of wind. And that requires a build program. You've got to look at the mix. You don't look at the price of any one component You've got to say, what is the total price of the total mix over the period? You need 128,000. If you were to build it with a nuclear program and a coal program, you only need 98,000 megawatts to be built. And say you go on to the unconstrained idea of delivering 76,000 megawatts with wind of 108,000. You need a build program in total of 212,000 megawatts. You can do that very easily with nuclear or coal, using a lot less of the full. But it's not expected to have such large reserves. Which brings me to the point of risk. You've got to talk about dispatchable electricity. Unless you talk dispatchable electricity, you can't compare non-dispatchable electricity, which is solar, with dispatchable electricity. The more wind and solar you have, the higher the risks of what they call cost of unserved energy, or electricity. And they become very considerable. And when you add those factors in, the cost of more renewables, because less renewables and more coal and nuclear. So the risk factor reduces very considerably, and you just have to look at what's happening. One's got to look at making sure we put in place an environment that attracts investment. Social costs, which we've got to try to fund, but we need infrastructure development on a massive scale. Water is another one that needs the helping hand. And so we go on. If we develop gas, we will need them. So the upshot of this is that we need to make it attractive. We have to have vendor finance, and that, I gather, is available at lower interest rates for these sort of projects, providing you can make sure that you reduce some of the economic and political costs. And I think David is going to talk about the foreign exchanges. So from my perspective, from an economic perspective, if you consider nuclear over its lifetime, and you consider wind or solar over the lifetime of a nuclear plant, you'll find there's very little difference in the actual capital cost. And when you look at the system that's required, nuclear, and taken into account the cost of unserved energy, the actual cost of nuclear is far lower than with a renewable-based system. Coal is still, in my opinion, the cheapest, but you've got to change some of the habits, and we've got to diversify our mix. This is the essential program for the future.
The statement that is often made by anti-nuclear activists, or that is made on a daily basis, that the nuclear program will bankrupt South Africa. So I want to ask, what is the risk if things go wrong that it can actually bankrupt South Africa? Now, the first thing that's rather in our face that did go wrong, I did my last complete calculations, cost calculations in 2012. Now, the rand dollar exchange rate was about 8.50 then. It's now more like 14, 15 rands, 16 rands, depending on who spoke last in Parliament. But anyway, so that's one negative prediction that did happen, is that the rand lost most of its value, or about half of its value. Now cost us in rand twice what it would have cost us in 2012. And this is a complicated matter for which I do not have a full answer. We will only get the full answer once the tender documents come back with price tags on them. But I at least understand the question, and that sets me apart a little bit, because I can hear from the discussions of those that say that the thing is going to bankrupt us that they don't understand the question. And they don't understand the question because they think that when things go wrong in the world, the dollar price stays constant. So you just figure out what your dollar price was in 2012, and you just assume that it's roughly the same now, and then you just translate that into rands. Now, the big thing is that that is not true. So, what people want to do with the money that they get when they sell you a nuclear plant is they want to pay their people in their country. So if you buy from America, they want to pay American welders, American designers, and American patent rights and so forth, and they need to do that in dollars. So obviously, something big goes wrong in the world, like Brexit or whatever, the Chinese, we will see, you need to see what comes out of that, because they're not so used to building outside of China. Russia, I just want to say that about Russia, that in the same time that the rand, in the sense that two things, there is a real risk that the economic crisis of 2008 will come back. And in 2008, 3%, that's the real rate of return. Now the point is that and that's on the capital, that's not on the fuel and that kind of thing. So because the nuclear plant costs about twice as much as a coal plant, it means that the actual profit that government prescribes that we should work into our numbers is about twice. Now that for a coal plant, I've got the 2012 numbers here, where I worked out that nuclear would cost 83 cents per kilowatt hour and coal 87. But in that is included the 43-cent profit for nuclear and only a 14-cent profit for coal. It means that if the actual price that you get drops by 14 cents, then the coal goes into a loss, while the nuclear is then actually still making a 30% profit. To put it in percentage, 52% of that cost is profit for nuclear and only 16% for coal. So nuclear can absorb a 52% reduction in electricity price before that starts to run at a loss. And with that I will conclude that really shows that the motto that nuclear can bankrupt us, according to the numbers I have, that's the one thing it won't.
Thank you, Darwin.
The industry is going through transformation. Traditionally, the sources of finance for the nuclear power plants have been government, and they continue to be government to that extent. But new players coming into the picture in terms of financing institutions and so on. So we need to adjust as an industry, and we need to start being able to speak to the financiers of this world, bankers of this world. We all know that the nuclear engineers and nuclear scientists are some of the worst nerds in this world. The language that they speak, the language that the bankers who are in nice suits and whatever speak are not the same. When a nuclear scientist speaks about the latest technology with excitement, the banker sees this because it has not been tried anywhere else. So those kind of different perceptions about the same thing need to be managed. The very same banker who has got a problem with latest technology in nuclear power plants is quite happy to buy the latest technology in Mercedes-Benz. They don't care that it has not been tried anywhere else. They want to be the first one. So these things are about perceptions, how we perceive things and how we accept some of the risks. I've often wondered why the aviation industry is so fortunate in that most of you would have flown. You flew in this morning. He trusted that the aircraft would deliver him where he was going. The moment he was on that plane, he had no idea which way they were going. They could have been going south or east, or he had no idea except to trust the pilots. For some reason, we do not trust the nuclear scientists and engineers to think there's something funny going on. And therefore, perceptions of risk are very high. This is what drives most of the costs in the industry. We also have issues around project delays. Because typically they've got no projects, yes, big infrastructure projects, but a lot of it has to do with perceptions as well. Because the public is not happy, you may find a project being delayed for a very long period.
It's clearly a very emotive sort of conversation about whether it's right or wrong. There is nothing wrong with procuring nuclear. Nuclear can be procured on an affordable basis, but everything is dependent on a bunch of assumptions that you make. So when you start talking about the assumptions around whether a country can procure nuclear energy, people like Rob will really reference to the fact that the cost of debt financing for a country is inherently dependent on the rest of the world's political view on the stability of that country. If we lose our credit rating tomorrow morning, the cost of nuclear becomes infinitely more expensive than it is today under the assumption that we currently have an investment grade credit rating. So there are a huge number of factors that are coming to this entire mix. And I think the biggest problem where most of the confusion lies is between any form of understanding about the cost benefit of procuring different technologies at different times in the life cycle of a country versus so what happens is that the numbers that are being used, the numbers that are being plotted, generally contain a huge series of assumptions which are extremely hard to validate. So when we are pricing debt associated with 5-year lending for a small IPP, let's just say a rooftop installation, the assumptions can always be 100% spot on. When you start trying to forecast a piece of infrastructure which will take 10 years to procure and operate for another 70 years, your assumptions around what inflation rates are going to do for that period of time, what the cost of energy is going to be like, the demand for energy is going to be like, fundamentally are going to be wrong. So I think the problem is that there is this incredibly emotive sort of piece around the merits, a lot of which is being driven by discussions on things like whether we can procure properly, whether we can procure on time, in budget, etc. Financing arrangement that replicates the life over which you're going to be able to produce power. So in the South African renewable energy procurement process, 20-year PPAs are being backed by 17 to 18 years worth of debt financing. Projects are being geared at a rate of about 80% gearing, 20% equity. Now, most of those projects have either a 12 or a 24-month build, depending whether you talk about EV or wind. And so when you lend 100 million rods to a project at the outset, you've got 99% probability that it will generate enough power over 17 years to be able to repay your debt. With nuclear procurement, the single largest factor that influences the bank's ability to fund as easily as we do into renewable energy is that it's going to take you 10 years. You need to have a solution as to how you're going to fund those interest roll-up costs during the 10 years. So very, very simplistically, 100 million today at 10 becomes 20 million. 10 million today is 200 million in 10 years' time if you capitalize interest through the entire life cycle. If that's your starting point at which you then try to repay the debt, you need to charge a pretty significant tariff for a very significant period of time to amortize that cost. So the innovators, the people out there who are going to bring the right business financing solutions to South Africa for our procurement process have already been having conversations about how to address that. That is one of the first and most significant challenges that needs to be brought into the mix. The second, David did allude to, is the currency cost. The fact that you will be largely borrowing in our currency, and that a large part of that, so whether it's vendor finance or whether it's vendor finance, I'll talk to some of the options. You're going to be paying a dollarized cost of funding, and you're going to be earning your tariff from your consumers in local currency for a very, very protracted period of time. So the solution there again is to split the mix between the local content and the international content, minimize the international content, and bring the localized content down to, optimize it as much as possible. That you can afford based on a balance sheet, whether that happens to be Westinghouse, EDF, etc. And again, the fundamental issue there is that there needs to be some form of revenue generation during the construction period, because otherwise the costs just become pretty exorbitant, and most balance sheets will deteriorate very rapidly. There's something called the French Excelsior model, where really grouping of industrial investors, banks and institutional investors formed from consortium, signed a 24-year offtake agreement with EDF and secured long-term fixed costs of electricity through that offtake agreement. So really an underpin from the buyers of electricity. They were then able to use the electricity themselves or on-sell it. The problem with that mechanism, or sort of the problem that that mechanism requires that you have a liberalized energy market, that anybody can wheel electricity, buy and sell, so that you can, so in the event that you no longer have the full requirement for yourself, you can on-sell to somebody else. And the market essentially will set the price. There's also a structure, the Finnish Mankala model, where again a consortium was acquired, also formed by industrial and utility shareholders, and in return for their equity, they were able to procure up to their equity amounts of electricity at a relatively fixed cost, which is an energy pass-through, on fuel supply pass-through, and again, they were able to then use that power for their own use or on-sell it. The fourth mechanism is classically a vendor financing solution, where the vendor comes along and says, these are the conditions, I can provide 100%, 50% of the gearing, and these are my terms. Often, again, supported by export credit financing or direct government support in the case of sovereign wealth funds. Then a number of projects have been done using export credits and debt financing with support directly from the government. Private financing mechanisms where, again, there are two different forms of government support mechanisms, either one where the government writes a direct guarantee. The Hinkley Point project is potentially one of those where Infra UK will provide a guarantee in respect of the project, and then there are various revenue support mechanisms through the power purchase agreement over the tenor of the debts. So almost all of these mechanisms are plainly impacted by the sections of the long-term country credit rating. Generally, they have mechanisms built in which say the cost of financing today with a rating of BB is LIBOR plus 3%, and that rating, so that pricing will move through the life of the project if the rating deteriorates. So I think one of the issues that the nuclear industry needs to get into the mix in the marketing aspect. The safety aspect, I think, is pretty well understood by people who know. Obviously, a lot of marketing will have to be done around that safety piece. But
there are many ways of doing it, which Michael has taken us through. The country's credit rating is really important in doing that. It's probably cheaper over time than almost anything else. It can be insured against all sorts of risks. I was amazed at the various risks that were mentioned by Mark that you can insure against, just not the politicians, as I said.